This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Thank you for downloading this podcast of The World at One from BBC Radio 4. Hello and welcome to The World at One with me, Mark Mardell. As the trade war escalates, the Chinese Prime Minister warns everyone will get hurt. We shouldn't harm the innocent. President Trump tweets it will bring far more wealth to the US.
The idea that American workers or American farmers would gain is really not borne out by any of our empirical experience. But it is something that they believe in, and I think they are using this tool with the Chinese in a way which has gotten a lot of countries rallying around the principle, if not the actual method being chosen.
The Sultan of Brunei says gay people won't be stoned to death. Not everyone is reassured. We have a special report from the country.
If you're gay in Brunei, do you feel you can be just as open about it there as if you lived in any neighbouring country like Indonesia or Malaysia, or do you think you have to be a bit different?
We all know homosexuality in Islam is frowned upon. People say you go straight to hell.
There's plenty of choice in the coming Euro elections. If you really want to leave the EU, who should you vote for? We'll hear from UKIP and the Brexit Party. And Freddie Starr has died without ever turning a hamster into a sandwich.
Freddie Starr ate my hamster. How would you like that for 20 years? 20 years. Doesn't it give you a headache? Doesn't it?
We talk about that Sun headline with the editor at the time. The BBC News is read by Diana Speed.
President Trump has said he is in absolutely no rush to finalise a trade agreement with China, hours after the United States more than doubled tariffs on many Chinese imports. In a series of comments on Twitter, he said the talks with Beijing, which are due to resume later today, were continuing in a very congenial manner. China said it deeply regretted the decision to raise tariffs and vowed to take what it called necessary countermeasures. From Beijing, our correspondent John Sudworth reports.
Furniture, internet modems, car parts and vacuum cleaners are just a few from a long list of more than 5,000 products made in China that are now subject to the 25% US import tax. It's a dramatic escalation, and it's meant as a signal of intent. The US president wants nothing less than changes to China's domestic law to end the protections given to Chinese industry. China says it will retaliate, although it's not yet given specific details. But Donald Trump's latest tweets make it clear the two sides are still talking. There's room for manoeuvre. The tariffs don't apply to goods already in transit, so they won't kick in for another 2 weeks or so.
The Office for National Statistics says economic growth accelerated to 0.5% in the first 3 months of the year, more than double the rate of expansion in the previous quarter. It's thought GDP was boosted by companies bringing forward activity ahead of what was meant to be the date the UK left the EU, meaning the pickup in growth is likely to be short-lived. Here's our economics correspondent, Katie Austin.
The Chancellor Philip Hammond has welcomed the overall increase of 0.5%, an improvement on 0.2% growth in the last 3 months of 2018. A pickup in manufacturing output provided a boost. Some of this may have been due to companies stockpiling and rushing to deliver orders ahead of the original date set for the UK leaving the European Union. The pharmaceuticals sector, for example, grew 9.4% between January and March. However, it's thought the strong picture to start the year tailed off with a small fall in growth in March. Figures released today also show that the UK's total trade deficit doubled to £18.3 billion in the first quarter of this year, driven partly by a sharp increase in imports of gold and cars. Some of this could also be the result of stockpiling activity.
The high street fashion chain Select has gone into administration, putting 1,800 jobs at risk. The retailer, which was bought out of administration in 2008, has 169 stores across the UK. Its owners have struggled to turn around the business after entering a company voluntary arrangement last year in order to negotiate cheaper rents. The administrators, Quantuma, are hoping to find a new buyer. There's been a warning that Europe is using natural resources at such a rate that if everyone else did the same, the world's ability to replenish itself would end today. Analysis by the World Wildlife Fund and the Global Footprint Network suggests that EU countries house just 7% of the global population, but collectively have the third highest environmental footprint after China and the US. Our environment analyst Roger Harrabin has been looking at the report.
Nature provides humans with a host of goods and services for free. Among them is the ability of forests to soak up our planet-heating carbon emissions, of the oceans to provide fish, and of the soil to nurture our crops. The question is, are these free goods and services being shared evenly round the world? An environmental research group called the Global Footprint Network says categorically not. In fact, it estimates that if everyone in the world used as many resources as the average European, today, May the 10th, would be the date on which humans had consumed as much from nature as the planet can annually renew. That means Europeans are denying other nations the ability to use those services without depleting the soil, the forests and the atmosphere. The numbers on studies like this are often slippery and contentious, but the UK government told us it does accept the principle of Earth Overshoot Day and is committed to rebalancing humans' relationship with nature.
2 French soldiers have been killed during an operation to rescue 4 hostages from northern Burkina Faso. 2 French tourists who were kidnapped during a safari in Benin 9 days ago were freed, along with an American woman and a South Korean national. The comedian Freddie Starr is reported to have died at the age of 76. The entertainer from Merseyside rose to national prominence in the early 1970s after appearing on the television talent show Opportunity Knocks, and became known for his eccentric behaviour. The Sun newspaper says his body was found at his home in Spain's Costa del Sol. The governing ANC party in South Africa will be returned to power after the country's general election, but with a reduced majority. With 80% of the results now counted, the ANC has 57% of the vote, its lowest share since it took power after apartheid ended in 1994. From Johannesburg, our correspondent Andrew Harding reports.
The ANC has slipped in this election, but 57% still represents an impressive victory for a governing party that has admitted to losing its way and to being swamped by corruption. President Cyril Ramaphosa can now push ahead with a clean-up operation in his cabinet and in key state institutions where he's acknowledged cronyism and impunity have run riot. But fixing South Africa's stagnant economy may prove more complicated, although some foreign investors will be persuaded to return by the business-savvy president. The ANC, under pressure from populists, is still sending mixed messages about its reform plans.
Andrew Harding reporting. Trade wars do not come with dramatic pictures of fire and explosions. There are no tales of heroism or savagery, but they can still shake the world. The latest escalation of the clash between the US and China has led the French finance minister to warn there is no greater threat to world growth and jobs. Donald Trump has escalated his conflict with China, increasing tariffs on imported Chinese goods from 10% to 25%. This was one reaction in Yiwu wholesale market on China's east coast.
I think it's very unreasonable. After all, a few years ago, business was pretty good. But trade tension has become more and more intense, especially after Trump's become president. It's affected us a lot. Some American customers are now not willing to come to China. After all, the cost of tariffs are too high right now.
Now the import tax on a huge range of goods, 6,000 categories in all, has been increased, from honey to rat poison, from parking meters to, most important of all, high-tech components. For that's what Americans may notice the most. Half the TVs sold in the US come from China, and if the cost is passed on to consumers, their price could increase by around £100. All this will apply only to goods which are being sent from China today, but this is no minor border skirmish, but a full-scale fundamental clash between superpowers with very different views of how the global economy should be. Isabel Hilton is editor-in-chief at China Dialogue and joins me in the studio now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What happened overnight, and perhaps more importantly, why?
Well, Donald Trump had threatened to do this in a series of tweets at the weekend, and this was to have been the week that everything got tied up. The Chinese came anyway with this hanging over them, hoping that this would be resolved by the end of the week. But the deadline came Friday morning when the tariffs were supposed to have been implemented, and no deal has been reached. They continue to talk today, but it's pretty much in doubt as to whether they're going to get to a kind of satisfactory arrangement. So both sides are playing brinkmanship right now. You know, the Chinese, the United States accuses the Chinese of rowing back on something that had been agreed, which is exactly what Trump advises in The Art of the Deal, by the way. You know, just as it's on the table, pull back.
They've been reading his book.
They may have been reading his book, but it's also a fairly well-established tactic in the Chinese playbook, you know, because it allows the negotiators to play the nice guy and then say, but the big bad boss back home, he won't accept this, so my hands are tied. So this is where we are. So we have the short-term issue,